All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Tesla.
Hmm.
And you might be driving one right now. You might just be fascinated by the company. Or maybe you're just wondering what all the hype is about. Whatever it is today, we're going beyond the headlines to really understand Tesla's impact. And to separate the hype from the reality, we'll be pulling from the book Tesla, the cult, the cars, and the chaos, and trying to answer some questions like, is Tesla really revolutionizing the car industry and saving the planet? Or is it more about status symbols and a very controversial CEO?
Well, it is a remarkable story. I mean, they've gone from this startup in 2003 to the most valuable car company in the world. And it only took them a couple of decades to do that. And they've outsold these giants like, Toyota and Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And that Model S they launched in 2012, that was a huge turning point for them and for the entire industry.
Yeah, I remember seeing those early Model S cars on the road. It felt like the future had arrived. But it wasn't just about building electric cars, right? It was about disrupting the entire auto industry.
Exactly. They did things so differently. They sold directly to customers. So they completely bypassed the whole dealership model. And they really focused on the software and technology.
Yeah, they're always updating their cars.
Yeah, with those over-the-air updates. And that approach, it really appealed to a certain type of buyer, like those early adopters. And the tech-savvy people who wanted more than just a car. They wanted a whole connected experience.
And that kind of leads into this idea of the cult of Tesla.
Yeah.
The book really dives into this passionate fan base and their almost religious belief in the brand. And of course, in Elon Musk himself, you see it everywhere. The emblems, the memes, the online forums. It's beyond brand loyalty. It's a movement.
It really is. I mean, you can't deny the power of that brand loyalty.
Yeah.
But I think we have to examine both sides of the coin here. While Tesla has achieved some incredible things in terms of innovation, especially pushing the boundaries of electric vehicle technology, the book also sheds light on some downsides. Maybe don't get as much attention.
Okay, so let's talk about those downsides. What are some of those shadows lurking behind this sleek design and behind these promises of, a sustainable future? The book doesn't shy away from some controversy, right?
No, not at all. It looks at lawsuits over autopilot accidents, and there are accusations of questionable labor practices and even complaints about the quality of some of the cars, which is surprising given the price tag.
That is surprising because Tesla has this image of flawless technology and luxury. Is there a disconnect between the marketing and the reality?
That's a really good question. And it's one of the key things the book explores. Take their full self-driving capability, for example. They're selling it for $15,000. And they market it as the future of driving, with robotaxis and promises of fully autonomous vehicles. But the reality is it's a beta system that's still under development. And it's been linked to quite a few accidents.
You mentioned robotaxis. Can you explain what that means for listeners who might not be familiar with the term?
Sure. So Tesla has this vision for the future, where their cars equipped with this full self-driving software would basically become these self-driving taxis, picking up and dropping off passengers with no human intervention.
This is basically a ride-hailing service, but
Right.
with driverless cars.
Exactly. And that's where this impact chain example in the book comes in. So Tesla sells this vision of robo-taxis, right? People get excited about it and invest in it. But the system isn't actually ready.
Yeah.
And this leads to accidents and then lawsuits. And all of that pushes back the timeline for achieving true autonomous driving.
So there's a real gap between the vision and the reality.
There is.
And it raises some serious questions. Like, what if this full self-driving dream never actually happens? What happens to Tesla's stock value? What happens to all those customers who invested thousands of dollars in this promise?
That's the risk they're taking. And the book doesn't shy away from exploring those potential downsides.
And it's not just the technology itself, it's also the culture around it. The book describes Tesla's work environment as incredibly demanding. With employees working like 100 hours a week, can that kind of intensity even be sustained? And what does it mean for the people building these cars?
Yeah, that's another crucial aspect the book looks at, is this move fast and break things culture, sustainable in the long run.
Okay.
Both for the employees and the company's ability to actually deliver on its promises. And that's something we'll dig into more as we continue our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into Tesla, where we're really getting into the company, their culture, and all those controversies surrounding this electric vehicle giant.
Yeah, we left off talking about how demanding that work culture is at Tesla. It makes you wonder if that intensity is really sustainable long term. I mean,
Yeah.
100-hour work weeks, that just sounds exhausting.
It does. The book really paints a picture of this workplace that's always pushing the limits, driven by this constant need for innovation. And while all that might have worked in those early days, the question is, what's the impact? on the employees themselves, and ultimately on the quality of the cars they're building.
Yeah, it's like squeezing an orange. You can get a lot of juice out at first, but eventually you're just left with a dry pulp.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's about finding that balance between pushing the boundaries and creating a work environment where people can actually thrive. The book talks about how that pressure cooker atmosphere has led to some pretty high turnover rates and even raised concerns about safety.
That's interesting because Tesla presents itself as this company that's making the world a better place. But are they achieving those goals at the expense of the people who are actually making it happen? The book also mentions some concerns about Tesla's environmental impact.
Right, and it's important to remember that sustainability isn't just about the car itself. It's about the entire process, from where they get the materials, to how they manufacture the car, to what happens to it at the end of its life.
So while Tesla is promoting these electric vehicles, which is definitely good for the environment, there are still some questions about their overall footprint.
Exactly. For instance, the book looks at the challenges with batteries, like how they're produced and recycled. And while Tesla batteries can be recycled, the process is expensive and complicated. So there are concerns about whether those batteries are actually being recycled properly, or whether they're just ending up in landfills.
It seems like there's often this gap between the marketing and the reality.
There is.
Companies like Tesla might be moving us towards a more sustainable future, but we have to look at the bigger picture, Consider the potential downsides and hold them accountable for their whole impact.
Absolutely. And speaking of holding companies accountable, the book also goes into those controversies around Tesla's Autopilot system.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before, but I think it's worth spending a little more time on it. It's a technology that has generated so much excitement, but also a lot of concern, especially when it comes to safety.
Right. There's this tension between innovation and regulation. Tesla has been pushing the limits with this self-driving technology. But are the regulations keeping up?
And that brings us back to that impact chain example we were discussing.
Exactly. Tesla is selling this idea of a future with self-driving cars. And people are buying into it. But the reality is, the technology isn't quite there yet. And that gap between what they're promising and what's actually possible, it has real consequences, like accidents and lawsuits.
And it makes you wonder, who's really responsible when something goes wrong? Is it the driver who's supposed to be paying attention? Or is it the company that's selling a technology that maybe isn't ready yet?
That's a tough question, with no easy answers. The book doesn't try to give you all the answers, but it does a good job of laying out the different sides of the argument and encouraging people to think critically about these things.
It feels like we're all part of this big experiment with self-driving cars, with really high stakes. And speaking of high stakes, we can't talk about Tesla without talking about Elon Musk. The person running the whole show.
He is a fascinating character, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's been called so many things: a visionary, a genius, a showman.
Yeah.
And I think it's all true. His personality is as much a part of the Tesla brand as the cars themselves.
He's definitely not your typical CEO. I mean, one day he's challenging Putin to a duel on Twitter, and the next he's launching a car into space.
I know. He's unpredictable.
It's hard to know what to make of him sometimes.
The book talks about how Musk's personal brand is so closely tied to Tesla's brand, what he says and does. It has a real impact on the company. Their stock price, their public image, and their future.
It's like he's this walk-and-talking marketing campaign for Tesla, which can be really effective.
Yeah.
But it also creates a lot of volatility.
Yeah. You're right. His impulsiveness and unpredictable behavior, they've created both opportunities and challenges for Tesla. On one hand, he's generated a ton of buzz and excitement. But on the other hand, his actions have also raised concerns.
About his judgment, and whether Tesla can succeed in the long run.
It's like he's constantly walking this kite rope between brilliance and recklessness. And you never know which way he's going to fall.
That unpredictability, it's part of what makes Tesla so captivating. They're a company that's always pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and exceeding expectations. But they're also facing some serious hurdles, both within the company and from the outside world.
It reminds you that progress isn't always this straight line upwards.
Right.
There can be bumps in the road, setbacks, and things you just can't predict. And as we go into the final part of our deep dive, we're going to take a step back and look at the big picture. What does Tesla's story tell us about the future of transportation? How will technology change our lives? And what are the ethical questions we need to think about as we move forward?
So welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Tesla. We've covered a lot. From their amazing technology and passionate fans, to, the controversies and Elon Musk himself.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. Tesla's definitely a company that gets people talking.
Yeah, they have. It seems like they've really tapped into something bigger than just cars. They've become this symbol of both our hopes and our fears about the future, like a test case for how we feel about technology and innovation.
I think that's a great point. Tesla represents this clash between idealism and reality. On one hand, you have this push for electric vehicles,
Yeah.
for sustainable energy, even space exploration. But then you also have to deal with the practicalities of manufacturing, labor practices, and the complexities of actually introducing these new technologies into the world.
Yeah. Like they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
Even with the best goals, there will always be unintended consequences, trade-offs, and challenges to overcome.
And that's why it's so important to have these discussions, to really dig deeper, look beyond the surface, and examine those complexities. You can't just buy into the hype or dismiss the criticism without really thinking critically about it all.
I remember when I first started reading this book, I was surprised by how much I didn't actually know about Tesla. I had this idea of them as this futuristic company, single-handedly saving the planet. But as I read more, I realized it's a much more complicated story.
I think a lot of people feel that way. Tesla has this very carefully crafted image. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, of their technology and Elon Musk's personality. But like we've been talking about, there's a whole other side of this story.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to hear your perspective. Is Tesla ultimately a force for good? Are they moving us towards a better future? Or are we getting carried away with a vision that might not be realistic?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer. They've made huge contributions to electric vehicles, and they've really shaken up the car industry. But they've also been accused of cutting corners, making promises they can't keep, and putting speed ahead of safety.
Yeah, it seems like they're always walking this fine line between innovation and recklessness.
Exactly. And I think that uncertainty is part of what makes them so interesting. Tesla is a company that makes us confront some uncomfortable truths about technology, about the future, and about the power these big companies have in shaping our world.
We can't just sit back and accept whatever technology is thrown at us. We need to be involved, ask tough questions, hold these companies accountable, and I'd create the future we want.
I couldn't agree more. It's about being informed and engaged, not just passive consumers. And I think that's what we've tried to do with this deep dive. Give you some insights, some context, and some things to think about. But ultimately, it's up to each of you to keep learning and form your own opinions.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of the Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of Tesla. And until next time, keep diving deep.